Welcome to the Flash Performance Garage, where today we're going to provide you with a little bit more support. My project for today is actually a simple one. It's a simple fabrication basic that we need to learn, and that is how to cut and weld. We're going to be using my Cornwell multi-process welder and my Cornwell plasma cutter to do this. One of the things that I have learned in my fabrication experience is I'm not as good as I want to be. We've all seen those guys that can take a piece of sheet metal and hammer it with a block of wood and a wooden mallet, and all of a sudden it looks like a fender. I am not that guy, and I am a firm believer that having the right equipment can make up for a lack of talent. Now you have to know how to use that equipment, and you have to have good equipment. And that's what we're going to go over today. So today my process is to support this rear spring shackle. Now what I'm working on is a 1982 Chevy truck on a 2000 Chevy frame. When I did this frame swap on this truck, we did it for all the upgrades. We did it for the better suspension, the better drive line, the better handling, all those pieces. Plus, I got the truck at the right price. So in that process, I also had to extend the frame. I had to move this wheelbase back 16 inches to be able to fit the wheel well of the new body. When I did that extending of the frame, I had to relocate that front shackle, and you can see here is where the shackle used to be, and then I had to move it back to here. When I did that, I lost all the support of this bracket on this lower shackle. Now there's nothing back here to support it, so it actually can have a tendency to bend in or out. Today we're going to be able to reinforce that by using some plate steel, cutting it out with a plasma cutter, and then welding back in on the gussets. It's going to be a pretty simple process, so stay tuned. It's going to be a good time. Here's a little bit closer look. Here's where the spring shackle used to be, and here's where the spring shackle is now. Again, there's nothing on the back side of this to be able to support any movement side to side. So we're going to cut a plate out on the back side. We're going to template that, cut it out, and weld everything back in using our Cornwell tools. We're also going to cut out this old brace using the plasma cutter. Let's get the template drawn out first, and then we can use the plasma cutter to get this done, and then we'll start cutting on some plate steel. For this process, I just grabbed a piece of heavy printer paper. To template this, you can do a couple of different things. We can take that and we can draw around it and draw on the inside and do all that, but I only have one pair of hands, and to hold it and mark it all at the same time will be a bit of a challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my paper with my one hand, and then I'm just going to scratch it with the marker on the back side to be able to get my outer shape of the template. Now I can take that template and I can draw on that and cut it all out and make sure that we're ready to go. Now that I have my template outlined, I'm going to take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut out around that outline. The beautiful part about metal is it's easy to take it back off if you made too much. So it doesn't have to be exact, it just has to be pretty close. But by using this template, we're going to be able to save some steel in the process. The original template and the original bracket has this center part is empty. I don't want to do that, but you'll notice that you can see where the bolt is from the original hardware. Now I need to be able to get to that so I can take that spring shackle off if I ever need to. So we're going to have to make sure that we take that out, but that gives us a rough outline of what that shackle looks like. Now that I have my template cut out, I just got a piece of plate steel. Now I got this from my local drop shop. If you don't know what a drop shop is, that is your metal supply store that you go to their back room where all the drops of steel are, or extra pieces of steel. So I bought this piece. It was much bigger, but I've used it multiple times just for weight. So I didn't have to buy a whole plate. I just bought the drop, and now I can use that for many other things like this project here. So I'm going to take this template and I'm going to lay that out on my piece of metal, And then we're just going to draw around that. Now this part here that I'm drawing, this is the frame, and that is not straight. That has a little bit of a curve to it. So that's why I didn't put that on my edge. I'm just going to draw around, and then I'm going to draw my circle on the inside. So now I have my template for my bracket. I'm going to use my Cornwell plasma cutter to be able to cut this out. If you've not used a plasma cutter before, it's something you need to put on your bucket list as a fabricator. This makes so much easier to cut steel, especially thicker steel like I'm doing here. I got my little gauge here to see the thickness of the steel. So this steel, this is going to be 3/16 plate that I'm going to be cutting. I got the air hooked up to my plasma cutter. I got the ground hooked up here. Get my gloves and my eye protection. There's a couple things to think about when you're using a plasma cutter if you're new to it, and that is making sure that you have a plasma cutter with a good wand. Now this one does not have porcelain on the end, so I don't have to worry about breaking that or dropping it. That's actually a brass with a rubberized coating on the top of it. Second thing you want to think about is your direction and mobility of use. Pushing a plasma cutter is much harder than pulling it. When you're pushing it, you're always going to have a little bit of deviation and a little bit of off the line, whereas when you pull it, you can actually get a lot straighter line. You can also use a straight edge if you wanted to cut down and make sure that you get a perfectly straight cut. Not many pieces on this are going to be straight. So the thing I want to worry about is making sure that I have my cable controlled, and that way I can go around and I can do the whole thing without having any issues. I have it clamped to my table. I made sure that I have clearance on my table, so I'm not going to be trying to cut my table. Let's get this thing fired up. Now I have my power set on my plasma cutter to 30, and it goes up to 40. Again, this is 3/16 plate. I don't need to crank it up to the highest setting every time. If you have your setting too high on your actual plasma cutter, you'll create so much slag on the backside that you'll have you doing more cleanup than it's worth. Now this bracket is riveted on. Right here's a rivet and right here's a rivet. There's a couple different ways you can get these rivets off. You can cut them with a grinding wheel and then use an impact hammer to split them off. I have a plasma cutter. I'm going to use it. Let's see what happens. Sorry about that. Nobody ever said these rivets were easy. I win. You got a little dirty on that one. That's better. Now that our plates have had a chance to cool off a little bit and I can touch them, you can see there's just a little bit of slag here left on the edges. I want to clean that up before trying to put it up there and weld. So I'm going to, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can take a pair of pliers and just grab it and break it off. And you can see that you have very little slag and cleanup after you're done with that. Or you could take a hammer and just, what, you didn't know that was a hammer? Well, yeah. Why do you think they made that side so flat? That's a hammer. Okay, now that I got all the slag off, we're going to take a flap wheel, run around that just to kind of smooth out the edges because I'm not very good at plasma cutting. I got my safety gear on! Oh, yeah, sorry. I got my safety gear on. Make sure you get glasses on. Just using a flap wheel on my grinder. Next step in the process is to take our cut out metal piece and I'm going to clamp it directly to the bracket and then we'll cut the gussets to be able to weld those in. This is all going to be permanent. I'm not going to use hardware to be able to bolt it down because I was not able to get to the other side of the frame on the driver's side because the gas tank was there. So we're just going to weld everything in solid and never have to worry about taking it off. Let's get this clamped in there and put it in the right spot. Now I want to tack this in. I'm actually going to tack it in where the bolt holes used to be, and then I'm going to take my grinder and go around and just trim up the edges, maybe a little excess or waves that I had to make it all smooth on the outside, and then I'll burn it in the rest of the way around. In order to get welding started, I have to set up the process in the welder. Since this is a multi-process welder, the last time I was using it, I was doing TIG welding with it. I'm going to switch that back over, do our MIG, so I'm going to go previous screen until I get back to the settings. I'm going to rotate over to MIG, and I'm using C25. That would be 25% oxygen, 75% argon. So I'm going to do select yes. It already tells me my setup there on the screen. I have that done. What wire size am I using? I'm using 030 wire, and I am welding on 3/16. So we're going to go up to our 3/16, and we're going to do enter. Now that is set and it does all the thinking for me. I don't have to worry about making sure I have my wire speed and my voltage set. The machine does all the process for me. I went back to my piece of scrap steel and clamped it onto the table. Now we're going to make our gussets. To make our gussets, we know that the frame is just over 2 inches. So I'm going to measure out this to 2 inches and I'm going to put a mark. Now what I want to do is I want to taper that all the way down to the corner. So I need something straight to be able to do that. And for my straight piece, I'm going to use a piece of angle iron. And you'll also see why I chose this. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to mark my line down to the corner. And that's going to give me my nice little brace. I'm going to take that same piece, I'm going to measure at the bottom 2 inches and put a mark. And then I'm going to draw a straight line through that one. And that way I have two braces ready to go. Let's get the plasma cutter fired up. These 2 pieces don't have to be exact. They're just gussets to be able to take any flex out that we're going to have. And the point up down here at the bottom is really not going to be that big of a deal. I'm going to kind of blunt that off a little bit so I have a little bit better welding surface. Whenever I cut this, I want to use a straight edge to be able to make the cut nice and easy. So I'm going to go back to my piece of angle iron that I had, lay that on my line, and then draw my wand down that with the plasma cutter. Now you saw those sparks that came up from the top instead of out the bottom. That was where I was going too fast. But luckily there wasn't too many of those, so I can still break that off without any real effort. A simple fabrication job that anybody can do with the right tools and a little bit of patience. Thanks to my Cornwell quality tools, welder, and plasma cutter, it made it simple and made the process go pretty quickly. If you have any questions about products used in the video, put them in the comments below. If you have anything to say about how I did it wrong, put them in the comments below. If you want to check out the Cornwell quality tools, welder, and plasma cutter, I put the part numbers in the description below, and I put some of the other videos up here in the cards along the way, so make sure you check those out too. I'm Chad from Flash Performance. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.